Good morning, and welcome to another installment of the Job Project. Well, we've gone through 3 installments thus far, and it's gotten real good. It's gotten really, really good. And why do I say that? Installments 1 through 3 was just chapter 1. So we're now moving into chapter 2. And in moving into chapter 2, there's a couple of things I want to bring out before going into chapter 2. Number 1, we know that Job was a man of integrity. We know that he was blameless. We know that he was righteous. We know that God had a conclave or a conference or a State of the Union address, as I've said before. And all the angelic bodies came together to give a report to God. Of course, Satan showed up as well. There was agreement made. Remember, I said trading places. And the agreement was, Job is getting all these blessings from you. Of course, he's going to love you and worship you. Take away these blessings and let's see how much he worships you and praise you. For a matter of fact, God, what he's going to do is curse you in your face. And so going towards the end of chapter 1, going into chapter 2, we know that all of Job's family was wiped out, the entire bloodline. All of his cattle, all of his goats, all of his slaves, just wiped out. Everything that Job owned was wiped out. Now, there are some other things of significance that I would like to bring to your attention with that being said. With Job being the most prosperous man of his day, and with him being who he was and having all the cattle and all the goats and all the ox and all the fields and the kids and the slaves, when that happened to Job by way of the adversary, it literally not only did it affect, but it affected the entire region. I would say to the point of it literally brought that region to a state of depression. And why I say that, if he has if he has the most cattle, if he has the most goats, if he has all of this stuff, of course he's just not hoarding it. He's selling it. He's selling it. He's using the land. He's feeding people from his land, which includes the vegetables and so forth. So this thing was climatic. Okay, so when he affected one person, it affected everybody in that region. Which brings me to this thought. When the adversary hits you and you are affected, you're not the only one that's affected. Everyone else around you that's connected to you is affected as well. And so that brings me into, first I want to read something. Like I said, remember, gotta have notes. Always have notes. Okay? Now, and I read, God ordains that his children walk in sorrow and pain, sometimes because of sin, sometimes to chastise them, sometimes to strengthen them, and sometimes to give opportunity to reveal his comfort and his grace. But there are times when the compelling issue in suffering of the saints is unknowable because it was for a heavenly purpose that those on earth cannot discern. Now, what do I mean by that? Sometimes God ordains things to take place in your life, whether there's sorrow and pain because of sin. Sometimes it's to chastise you. Sometimes it's to strengthen you. Sometimes it's to give you an opportunity to where you will see God's comfort and grace. All right? And there are other times when things happen that has nothing to do with you, that you can't even discern, that you don't even understand. All right? And in this case, Job falls into the latter portion of that. It was something that he just did not understand. Yet and still, when everything was taken away, when his kids were wiped out in the whole 9 yards, he worshiped. He worshiped God, which threw a monkey wrench in Satan's game plan for going after Job, to get Job to the point of cursing God in his face. Amen? So now let's turn to, and I'm going to open up my Bible as well. Let's turn to Job chapter 2. Job chapter 2 and in verse 1. And we will find something very interesting. Okay? And what we will find is going to be a changing of scenery once again. So we know in chapter 1, after everything was all said and done, that Job did not curse God. And so in chapter 2, and I read in verse 1, again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. So now the scene switches from Job going, worshiping God, praising God, to back to heaven. Kind of like, when you're watching TV, Law and Order. Dong dong. One of those. So it moves from the actual attack on Job and his finances and his bloodline to back up in heaven again. And again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" Then Satan answered, of course he knew where he came from, all right? But anyway, then Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." So he's looking at Job again. He's still looking at Job. Job did not buckle or fold like a chair on the first attempt. And so God says to him, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man." That Tam Yeshua that I was talking about, that he was so blameless and upright that he could have been considered, which is a foreshadow for things to come later in Scripture in regards to Jesus Christ, but he could have been considered a sacrificial lamb. That's how blameless this dude was, okay? He was Tam Yeshua, okay? So, God says to him, "For there is no one like him," says to Satan, "there's no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." And he still holds his integrity. "Although you incited me against him to ruin him without cause." So without him doing anything, this is God admitting, you had me, Satan, to hand over power to you so that you could do whatever you wanted to him other than kill him, to see that if he would curse me in my face. That didn't happen. So you had me to do this to ruin him without cause. Satan then says, check this out. He answers the Lord and said, "Skin for skin." All that a man has, he will give for his life. Skin for skin. Now, why did he say that? He was upping the ante, kind of like in poker. I see your 1,000, and I'm going to raise you 1,000. Skin for for skin. Now, in getting the translation of that skin for skin, and I read, it refers to a biblical law of retaliation, such as in the book of Exodus 21:23 through 25. It is a biblical law of retaliation, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Where we've heard that before, an eye for an eye, skin for skin. In other words, he's saying, hey, I've done all of this. Let me put his life in jeopardy, and he will gladly curse you in his face so that he can either die or be restored. One or the other. There is no in between. Okay? So now we see he's up in the ante. He goes skin for skin. Skin for skin. All right? So then he says, however, this is Satan talking to God after he says skin for skin. However, put your hand now and touch his bones and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your power. Only spare his life. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a potsherd to scrape himself while he was sitting among the ashes. Now, these sores that he got from head to toe, from foot to head, and everywhere in between, these sores in verse 7 of chapter 2 is a Hebrew term called shichin, S-H-C-H-I-N, which describes, now check this out, this is how bad these sores were. It describes the 6th plague that God imposed on Egypt when Moses was seeking to free God's people. So this plague wasn't, these sores or this plague wasn't your average sore or sores. These sores literally, just woo. Years ago in my 20s, for a matter of fact, it was around my birthday, I came down with the chicken pox. I'd never had chicken pox. And I was in Seattle living by myself, alone, no family, and came down with the chicken pox. And when I tell you it was the worst experience of my life, as far as physical experience I was covered from head to toe with chicken pox. Absolutely miserable. To the point that I said, God, either heal me or kill me. Either way, let's get this over with. I can't, this is too much. This is too much, God. I can't take this. So just imagine the sores that was on Job. And with the history of these particular sores, which was a plague, this same plague or the same type of sores that was placed on all of the Egyptians during the time of Moses seeking to have Ramses, the Pharaoh, to release God's children. So this brother was suffering. I mean suffering. Okay? Let me finish up because I don't have a lot of time left, all right? So, then, chapter 9, then his wife says to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. Stop. So he's sitting there with swords. He's scraping them off his wife. Now you already in bad state. Now you got this woman right here talking at the side of her neck like, do you still hold fast to your integrity? She's right here, adding extra anguish. But then look how the adversary uses her, his wife, and says, why don't you just curse God and die? But check out what he says in verse 10. But he said to her, you speak as one of foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept the adversity? Are we just going to take the good things of God and not accept the bad things of God? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. He did not curse God. So we see that he was faced with some things. Bloodline wiped out. Any possibilities of economic recovery was wiped out, not only for himself, but because of how devastating it was and who Job was. And like I said, of course, he was supplying, he had to have been supplying, goats and cattle and food and vegetables and all those things to the people in that area. So this thing was huge, what happened to Job, okay? And as we move on, you will see that it just gets better. But this lets you know just how much the adversary will come after your butt. And at the same time, we also see that God ordained it because God knew. So a lot of times, unbeknownst to Job, like a lot of times things happens to us, unbeknownst to us, God knows that we're not going to bend our knee and bow down and worship Satan. So be encouraged. Have an awesome weekend. God bless you. And may you continue to be and stay God strong. Peace.